What, in your opinion, are some of the most important things that policymakers need to get right to improve competitiveness and boost prosperity?
You know, Cristina, the answer to this question actually has evolved over time. If you go back to the 1980s, for instance, and you talk to your typical civil servant in one of the international financial institutions, the answer that you're likely to have obtained to this answer would have been, you need to have macroeconomic stability. It is absolutely essential to have stability of prices and a stable exchange rate, because in fact, it is impossible to establish a framework for sustainable economic growth otherwise. At least the data back then did not show of many countries that had been able to grow in a steady, sustainable way, with very uncertain, very unstable conditions in the financial markets, particularly inflation and the exchange rate. As the fight against inflation, met with increasing success, and central banks were able to basically bring inflation rates down pretty much everywhere all over the world, the focus shifted. It shifted to education, it shifted to the importance of institutions, it shifted to the importance of governments using the latest technologies to improve the quality of services and so on. One other factor worth mentioning here, of course, is also that these factors matter in different ways for different countries. For a country that is low income, in sub-Saharan Africa, getting your macroeconomic environment right and improving the quality of your institutions is tremendously important, because you're going to get a great deal more benefit by reducing, for instance, levels of corruption. Whereas in the case of a country like Finland or like Sweden, countries that already have a very stable macro framework, that have very low levels of corruption, have good, solid working institutions, what really matters there is their ability to innovate and to what extent are they able to boost the quality of and the skills of the labor force. Now, having said these things, let me mention three things which I think are very important in terms of getting right. One of them is that I think you actually have to get the budget right. And by the budget, I mean, the whole universe of policies that have to do with revenue and with expenditure. The budget is like the central nervous system of an economy. It's the most important organizing principle within an economy. It's the place where compromises get made. It's the place where the priorities of the government get reflected. If you get the budget right, I think you have a very good chance of at least creating the conditions for economic growth and for prosperity. If you get it wrong, and we have seen many examples of that in recent years, chaos and collapse is not impossible. And it has happened, from time to time in various parts of the world. Now, let me examine individually the two components. On the tax side, you need to have a system of tax administration that is relatively transparent, relatively efficient, that makes it easy for businesses, individuals to settle their tax obligations with the state. You would think that this would be in the best interest of the state, but you would be surprised in how many countries it's actually very, very difficult, to actually pay your taxes on time and in a way that is, relatively simple and transparent. But tax rates also matter. The data that we have collected at the World Bank suggests that when tax rates are very, very high, you begin to create all kinds of perverse incentives for tax evasion, for informality, and you don't want that. You don't want to have rates that are counterproductive in the sense that they actually are a signal to the business community not to pay their taxes or to find ways not to pay their taxes. So much for the tax system. In terms of the expenditure, I think it is very important for governments basically to get their priorities right. I have said before that we spend too much money all over the world in subsidizing energy and other things, which are regressive. They worsen income distribution. They are bad for the environment. They're bad in general for resource allocation. I think that we need to rethink and basically, for instance, spend far more money on education. The benefits of which over the longer term are going to be much higher. So the budget is really one important area. The other one, of course, is education. as the global economy has become more and more complicated and complex, we are discovering that the level of capacity, the skills requirements of the labor force today are much higher than used to be 30 or 40 years ago. Having a high school diploma is no longer enough to become part of the middle class today in a way that was the case, for instance, in the United States in the 1960s. Now, more specifically in terms of education, it isn't just a question of the level of spending. Spending is important. You do want to have adequate resources. But for instance, there are a number of studies recently which are showing that one of the most important factors driving high test results for students in a number of countries is how well teachers are paid, and whether the teaching profession is a profession that is attractive enough. Unfortunately, in most countries, our best university graduates do not go, into the education field. It is regrettable because we have incentives which are, it seems to me, perverse. As societies, we should be creating conditions where some of our brightest young people are actually willing to spend the rest of their lives teaching children and educating children, because that is where they will have the most impact. It's also very important that we have an educational system that is inclusive, that doesn't just focus a lot of resources on the elite, but that actually, brings benefits, for everybody, including vulnerable groups and low-income groups. That is actually a very, very important factor as well in terms of the overall quality of the education system. And a third area obviously has to, I think, to do with gender equality. I've said before, educating girls is a very powerful engine of economic development and women's empowerment. A number of studies have shown that if you educate girls, the probability that their children, in the next generation will themselves be educated is much higher. It is good for fertility rates; they come down. Population rates slow down. It empowers women in the household, because if they work, they will be earning, and basically there will be a more balanced relationship with their husbands, because they will be making a contribution to household income. I think these three areas are the ones that come immediately to mind in terms of what really makes a difference in terms of competitiveness and improving productivity. One more thing which I just remembered, which I think is worth highlighting, is that competitiveness is essentially about boosting productivity, and productivity in the end has got very much to do with efficient allocation of resources. If in a country, because of traditions, because of prejudices, because of religious taboos or whatever, half of your population, namely its women, are prevented from making their contribution, to the economy, obviously productivity is going to be undermined. The pool of talent to which the business community has access to, in a country where women are being segregated and discriminated against, is much narrower than in countries where they are able to participate fully. So clearly, gender equality is very much a driver of productivity and competitiveness in the 21st century.